Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this session where we will be discussing Pandora's Box, Taming the Wild West of Emerging Technology. In this session, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Husain Haqqani, politician, diplomat, and author of renown, who is currently a senior research fellow at AGDA. To my right is Dr. Hoda Al Khzaimi, Vice Provost of Research, Translation, Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the New York University, Abu Dhabi, and Director and Founder of Emirattech. And then in front of me, I have Sam Winter-Levyi, who's a Fellow of Technology and International Affairs at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and a Director of the International Warfare Initiative at the US Military Academy at West Point. I myself am Victoria Stewart-Jolly. I'm also a Senior Research Fellow at AGDA. So we'll start today's session with a question directed to Dr. Al Khzaimi. Can international policy shape the equitable distribution of technology, its benefits, and prevent a digital divide?
I would say for sure, the quick answer is yes. But we do have to pay attention to the details that are being manifested in today's, I would say, race towards technology development. We have seen a great geotech kind of session early on in the morning. And if we can take one major takeaway, that it's not an easy build when it comes to building an equitable world for resource allocation when it comes to the defining moments of this new power. Technology has become the power of the new world. And being a partner in developing this technology means having an equitable interest and bringing everybody else on the table. However, as well, we should take it with a bit of salt when we have recommendations like export controls and knowledge kind of alienation practices, because it would definitely build for divide. Technology by itself is such a soft component. You have over, I think, 5 billion of people connected on a digital space. The rest of the 3 billion is on and off. And this manifests its way in having over 1.7 people who are not connected on financial services globally or don't have access to financial streams. And in today's world, we're trying to build that kind of ripple effect of contagious connectivity when we are developing technology. However, the current race that exists on emerging technology mandates the divide and mandates the segregation, where we're trying to polarize the world into developers and adapters. And we're trying to upload the adapters by saying, yes, it's great, because you're gonna be fast movers in emerging economy and emerging markets. You're gonna reap the highest profit out of different technologies. For example, for AI, it's 19 trillions by 2030. And we should ask ourselves who are the beneficiaries of these 19 trillions. But also we should reconstruct the stack of developing these critical technologies. We know that in the world we have over 57 critical technologies in development today. That's by the Australian Policy Institute. They run this kind of a global parameter of monopoly. And 44 technologies of them are in mid to high risk monopoly by China. And then you do have the United States on 19 to 8 critical technologies, and India and the rest of the world is following on. But when you dig deeper and you see what are the essential elements of those technologies, there are critical minerals, right, that exist. 80% of those, like critical rare earth minerals, exist in China, and they control 58% of the production of mineral. But the rest also exist in developing economies like Congo, Chile, Peru, but we still live in a divided world where we bring the essential of those kind of minerals like lithium, cobalt, that are critically important for developing new energy sources or introducing the current energy generation platforms. As well as introducing the semiconductors they're used in semiconductors, chip manufacturing. But the equation doesn't work because mineral extraction practices, they're still like outdated as if we are living in the dark ages. And countries who are primarily producers of those minerals don't actually reap the rewards of advanced technology development that exist in developed economies and developed markets. So we see the GDP impact primarily on countries that are carrying those kind of advanced GDP economic structures. So to build an equitable access to technology, we have to resolve for all these stack of issues, which is the stack that says if you are a contributor in today's world for emerging technology development, you have to grant access as well for communities and societies to develop their own science, their own technology, their own best practices when it comes to building these technology in their indigenous homes, and not just to be consumers in the global market.
That's an incredibly complex geography that you set out, and I'm actually going to ask for a continuation to turn the question to you, Husain. What kind of international regime would be needed to create a more equitable platform as described?
Let me begin by saying that international regimes are always far more complicated to develop, and they always take a lot of time. Just to give you an example, nuclear weapons were first used in 1945. By the time that an international regime to regulate nuclear proliferation was developed, we had already come to, I think, the 1980s. Similarly, chemical weapons, banning chemical weapons. Chemical weapons were first used in the First World War, which was from 1914 to 1919. And when were they finally banned? It came, the Chemical Weapons Convention was finally agreed to in 1997. It took that many years for the negotiation of some kind of an international regime. So, is an international regime about artificial intelligence, about emerging technologies, desirable? Absolutely. Is it going to happen? Is it feasible? Definitely. Are there ideas on the table that people will try to implement? Definitely. But is it going to happen quickly enough? I don't think so. At the end of the day, the whole emerging technology phenomenon basically is about innovation. And it's quite clear that there is going to be more innovation in countries with resources than in countries with less resources. And those who develop a technology hold on to it. They may want to share it, but they would share it only on their own conditions. And so an equitable distribution and equitable access to all technologies may be a desirable goal. It may be something we all want, but I don't think that the world as it is currently configured as a world of sovereign entities is configured for immediately developable or immediately implementable global regime. That said, I would say that it's important to start the conversation. Start the conversation about an international regime. And if that can happen, it will involve the tech sector, the private sector of technology development. It will require the governments, and it will require civil society. It will require conversations within countries and between countries. And only then we'll become even close to having some kind of a draft of an international regime. And going by history, maybe we can short-circuit it a little. Instead of taking 30, 40, 50 years, maybe we'll take 5, but it will still be a multi-year process. It's not going to be easy, it's not going to be quick, and those who already have an advantage will resist any attempt to try and diminish their advantage.
Your Excellency, as well, I wanted to highlight, based on the very valuable insight that you have provided, that we live in a world that is heterogeneous in power, and we need to use every little bit of that kind of structure of power towards our advantage. I see great value in international regimes, but also, as you said, building governance is quite difficult. For us to build a technology standard, it takes 3 years. For a technology to disrupt market, it takes days and months. So sometimes by the time you bring in these regulations into market, things are outdated, and we need to have like faster measures. So in the current scenario, we have segregation and inconsistency when it comes to international efforts. The trade tariff wars that exist in between countries slow down innovation. So this kind of taxation of slowing down innovation and monopolizing access to resources related to developing technology need to be internationally penalized or internationally, I would say, prohibited to allow different nations to develop resources at equitable resources, I would say.
Do you want to come back?
Very quick answer. Yes, I already agreed to the desirability. I'm just talking about the reality. The reason why the Chemical Weapons Convention took as many years to negotiate was that whoever had a particular type of chemical was the one that was holding back on agreeing to banning that. So yes, it is a desirable thing. The conversation has started. My comment is about the reality of where things are. I do not think that happening in the very, very short-term future.
Pulling on that point, I'm going to turn over to Sam and ask, and a continuation, does global tech competition lend itself to control? Easy question.
I think it depends a lot on the technology in question. So if you think about something like AI, right now I think there is a window of control, because to train the largest frontier models, which a lot of people are worried kind of pose the biggest risks, requires a huge amount of computational power, requires tens of thousands of chips organized in data centers. And so computational power gives governments a kind of node of control that they can try and that they have some visibility over. They can kind of see where these chips are. They can try and control the distribution of those chips. And so the US export controls on China and other countries are an attempt to do that sort of governance over one node of this kind of emerging tech regime to try and kind of intervene at one part of the stack when it comes to AI. If algorithms get kind of increasingly powerful and they require less and less compute to the extent you could be kind of developing a really powerful model just on a laptop, then it becomes much, much harder to have any sort of visibility into who's training models or what they're being used for. But at least for now, because front-end models require just so much scale to train, there is a kind of node for governments to try and kind of control them. Now there's a whole separate question of how do you kind of coordinate across countries and across companies to get them to agree to any sort of regulation. And I think that's a really difficult challenge. But again, I think there are some grounds for optimism. I think you're seeing companies agreeing to kind of various voluntary commitments. You're seeing movement at the international level, even between the US and China. That obviously there's a lot of competition between those states, but I think you are seeing some kind of Track 2 dialogues, some kind of, I wouldn't say consensus, but some sort of kind of emerging areas of agreement on some of the risks associated with powerful AI models. So I think there are definitely grounds for optimism, but it's certainly going to be very challenging to kind of try and coordinate and control, to try and kind of build a governance regime around AI at least.
I just don't want to limit my context of analysis to AI. I think it applies to any kind of paradigm of new technologies that are being developed on the market today that are new and disruptive to the markets. Emerging or advanced or critical technologies considerations are important. To us as countries who want to join this kind of a global race to develop technologies, the merit is to use this technology for the global good, for changing societal impacts and redefining economic value for the citizens. If we go with that thesis, then any country who joined the race, who can bring in the supply chain kind of cost on a global level, should be appreciated and valued in a global economy. And this is what in my opinion, countries at mass, like China and other countries are trying to do. The level of innovation that are bringing on the market is great because you don't have to just rely. I think India, for example, at the moment, and China, they have this kind of agreement which stems around using green clusters to develop emerging technology. And we need that. We need that to highlight the solutions that we can develop today because of the bottleneck of energy consumption that we are seeing. I mean, AI training models are consuming above any kind of global cluster put together of computing infrastructure. So all the computing infrastructure or cloud computational infrastructure energy consumptions is matching the AI training future consumption. So we will reach a plateau very soon. And having, like, I would say, diversified innovation regarding generating new sources of energy, not lithium-based, for example, or generating green power around those kind of initiatives is important, because at a certain point of time, we need to bring down the price value of developing these technologies, so countries who cannot afford to compete at that high ticket level can still join in the development and not just the consumption rates. Otherwise, we are assimilating technologies. I'm a fan, Sam, honestly, to having technology being at the tips of the fingers of the citizen. I'm a fan of those citizens joining, training the models, because if we don't do that, then those models are biased and those models are indigenously blind to the different fabrics that exist around the world. Our languages has to be preserved. Our heritage has to be preserved. And just relying on one compute structure and one nation or two nations development efforts for those technologies is not gonna cut it, because we will always miss something in the detail. Even if we did a great effort, as we have heard today, in building for Arabic language kind of LLM models, that's not good enough. I think the world has a tremendous landscape of problems to solve, or a Pandora box of problems to solve, and we need to bring the world with us in solving these problems and not just rely on a monopoly structures of building these problem-solving kind of hubs around the world.
Okay, so I think there's two lines of discussion that are coming out of this at this point. So on the one hand, there's the concept of the Pandora's box, and then the other hand, there's the concept of control. So I suppose, first of all, I'd like to ask the question, what do you think is in the Pandora's box?
Well, I would let the others talk more about that because they are more familiar with the Pandora's box. I am just the guy who looks at it from a strategic political perspective. And that is why I am gently trying to push against confusing desirability with likelihood. There's a difference. And it's important to understand that yes, it is desirable. Yes, it is something that that should exist. But I would just say, be very realistic about what the prospects are. They are not going to happen because they are desirable. Desirability has never been the criterion for many, many things in the world. And it is not going to be now. I know tech people actually often have this view that, it's so desirable. Like that's why, for example, when social media came about, the theory was it will increase democracy. Everybody will be able to speak and everything. It was only a matter of time before it was weaponized by some to try and improve and increase their control over what the world talks about. So there is the political reality, and then there is the tech reality. I'm trying to straddle that discussion. Now, let me just say that what's in the Pandora's box? I will just quote Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, who said that the country that leads in the development of AI will become, quote unquote, the ruler of the world. So this is a powerful man. This is a man who controls one of the great powers in the country, in the world. He thinks that way. I don't doubt that maybe they may not say it, but big leaders in America think the same way. Leaders in China think the same way. So it all ends up about, okay, how will we rule the world rather than, and that's what's in the Pandora's box. Using technology for dominance, using technology for hegemony, using technology for power, and using technology for weaponization. Just as an insight, let me throw this at the audience, that the gap between the arrival of air travel and the weaponization of airplane technology was only 8 years. In 1903, the Wright brothers flew their plane. By 1911, the planes were being used for reconnaissance and then to shoot each other down for combat. And so all technologies have unfortunately ended up being weaponized by those who want dominance, those who want preeminence, those who want to control. And how we guard against that depends on a number of factors and number of people. The technology people, the politicians, the diplomats, everybody will have to play a role in that. And then the media, in increasing awareness. The more people are aware that there's a Pandora's box, the more they will be willing to try and prepare for it and say, you know what, we have to think these things through. But the first step is this. The first step is conversation, because many of these things are not even being discussed, especially where they count. There is no international convention on emerging technologies that is being discussed. There is no international forum for the governments of the world getting together and saying, how do we improve access to technology? So are the innovators sharing it piece by piece with countries? For example, there's the United States willing to work with the UAE on AI, but their reason is very cynical. The reason is that they want the UAE to share the cost. And that's why they're doing it. They're not doing it out of the goodness of their heart. If they were, then they would share it also with Afghanistan, which is much poorer. So those are the global realities. And in that, I think we are very far from some kind of international regime, some kind of willingness on the part of the haves to share with the have-nots. And at the moment, the world remains divided between the innovators and the consumers of technology. The good thing is that more countries are trying to join the ranks of the innovators. And that is what is important, because that's what happened in everything else. It's always when multiple players emerge that a more equitable order starts to emerge instead of monopolies.
I'm going to throw this over to Sam. Just before I do, and the question is the same, what's in the Pandora's box? Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to ask questions, please feel free to, believe you can text them using a QR code. That's all I understand, but I will be, it's over there. I do have the questions. They will pop up here and I will field them. Sam?
Yes, I think one way to think about what's in the Pandora's box is that you can kind of break it down into two sets of risks. One is the kind of risks that we've been talking that we were just talking about in the last answer around state competition between the US and China around advanced technologies, competition with other states too. I think the second bucket of risks emerging from this kind of Pandora's inbox are risks associated with the kind of democratization of technology that we were talking about earlier, which has all sorts of benefits, all sorts of huge advantages, but also comes with some risks. So just to give one specific example, in the domain of synthetic biology, we're seeing a massive kind of democratization of who can conduct biological research. The interaction of biology, computational biology, and AI is leading to kind of vast progress in biomedical research, which has all sorts of great benefits. But it also means that it's massively expanding the pool of people who could be coming up with engineered pathogens, let's say, or playing around with various new compounds, and there's kind of major risks associated with that, and it's very hard to regulate that sort of thing as you drive down the kind of technological barriers to experimentation here. And so I think that's one major this area of synthetic biology. We've just lived through a pandemic that was very bad, but could have been far, far worse. You could easily imagine a pandemic with a 10% mortality rate as opposed to 1% mortality rate, and that's there are very real risks of that associated with just making it dramatically easier to come up with synthetic pathogens. So I think that's one area where we're seeing potentially a trade-off associated with this otherwise kind of very good development, the democratization of technology, and the kind of driving down, pushing towards a world where everyone can train a model themselves. I think that's a great thing, but it will come with these kind of risks that will be very hard to build kind of technological regimes around to regulate.
I mean, you've been very positive about the future so far. I suppose I'm asking you to take a little peek onto the dark side.
That's the merit of the Pandora box, right? It's the box of issues. I think we need to be holistic when we solve for this problem. I agree with Your Excellency, the ambassador. I mean, we are not living in this kind of delusional world where we think developing technology is just about technology itself and doing good. We understand the risk. We understand it's a weapon. We understand it's a global power kind of pursuit around technology as a critical resource at the moment. And at the same time, we do understand the risks that exist in between building it in silos. The problem is we are living, we are at the cusp of a tipping point. That's number one. We are used to developing technology through specific kind of big tech companies that are the custodians of developing this technology. They have the control over the diffusion of the technology, over the growth of technology. They can slow down technology development. They can accelerate technology development. But we should as well recognize that the cons of developing these technology don't take away from the pros and the advantages. Pros and the advantages. And towards that, if you have someone who's trying to dictate how the world growth towards optimal solutions should exist and should look like, versus having a reality where the solution development could come from 50 different pathways, given the fact that those people could live with the same ethical campus, or maybe better ethical campus, better moral campus when they develop this technology than the current custodianship. The tipping point I was talking about is, why are we living in a world that centralizes technology development? We are living in a world that decentralizes finance at the moment and decentralizes global power on assets. I know everything comes with the pros and cons.
I mean, that went well.
It's still going well. It still create a volatile asset. We cannot live in a world where we don't have diverse access to assets. We cannot live in a world where we have one solution, and that one solution is our golden ticket to tomorrow. We should appreciate the fact that we have to create an economy that is diversified. And to create that economy that is diversified, we have to create optionality for users to exist. Why do you think everyone wants to be in a race on technology? Because it affects not just their GDP, as the ambassador said, but also their TFP, their total factor of productivity, the amount of jobs that they can create around those technologies, the amount of innovation that would exist, the flow of capital, the efficiency rates. And during COVID, we've seen countries who have high TFP levels rising from crisis faster than countries who have higher GDPs. So it also controls your future resiliency on the map. So I'm with the fact that in today's paradigm, we need to break everything and reconstruct everything. The way we develop technology is not gonna cut it. We are developing it for functionality rather than for humanity. It's functional, it's perfect, but it doesn't respect in an absolute sense towards what Sam said. I have absolutely zero guarantees, a zero level of insurance that if I maintain the current model of building this kind of technology in a centric custodianship model, I'm not going to be objectified as a citizen. My rights is not going to be objectified on a global realm. That's not the case. Democratization structures that existed in the past and exist today, they're totally different. And we live in a world where people are aware of echo chambers. They're aware of false news. They're aware of misinformations. They have way better awareness than what existed in the 90s and the 60s, I would say. Technology has a positive turn as it has a negative turn. Yes, I agree with you. Deep fakes are maximizing, misinformation is maximizing. But did we have the same amount of reporters from war zones that existed in the past? Did we give that access to someone who is other than the CNNs in the world and the Fox News and the Al Jazeera? Because right now, that's what we are having. We're allowing citizens to report on realities that exist and reshaping the truth that exists on different critical zones.
I think we are talking about two different things. I'm not saying that isn't happening. I'm talking about that the desirability of having more actors, etc., etc. At the end of the day, it'll come down to who is able to innovate. So, for example, even in the pandemic, when it came to developing the vaccine, only 3 or 4 global actors were able to develop the vaccine. Yeah, no, I'm coming to that. And so I am agreeing with you without agreeing with you, which is I am saying that at the end, it's not going to be by making speeches. Oh, there should be an equal world. Everybody should be equal. Give us access to technology. That's not going to happen. It will happen by everybody innovating. So just to give you the nuclear example, the Non-Proliferation Treaty banned nuclear weapons, I think, in 1970 for any country except 5. Created a monopoly. Well, guess what? India, Pakistan, unofficially Israel, violated it. They didn't sign the treaty. They didn't become partners to it. And they developed nuclear weapons. That created a whole new environment in which the United States, China, Russia, France, and Britain had to deal with these countries as de facto nuclear powers. In the end, I'm talking about the international regime. There is not going to be an easy development of an international regime of emerging technologies. That's all I'm saying. In the end, nations will have to rise themselves, develop the technologies, and when they do, they will be able to compete with this reality. The monopoly will not break because we will make speeches that break the monopoly. Monopoly will break when we actually break it.
100%.
Just before you come back, for the purposes of full disclosure, there is an interesting split in the table between the people who are hugely technologically adept, and then my background is law, so I regulate everything, including breakfast. And Husain, who's a politician, who manages everything, including breakfast. And it's really interesting to see the very stark difference in approach coming from these two very clearly different positions, which is what's intersecting. Now, please.
I just want to highlight that as people who work in technology and develop technology, we are well aware that technology will go nowhere without international law, without international regimes. So we're not saying that there should not be international regime. It's a full stack of development, and that's part of the 360 view I was just discussing. As well, I acknowledge the fact that we are not doing enough for tech governance, for tech harmonization, for tech trade harmonization across different regimes. But as well, the former practices is not gonna be cutting it for future kind of ecosystem solution development. Do we want to live in denial because that's what's happening, forming a treaty, imagining that those global powers will be just developing emerging tech and ending up with someone breaking the treaty and then dealing with the situation over and over again? Like, let's reconstruct it with a holistic design in mind and bringing people in mind. And I was on the UN ICT session. We had a UN ICT session that exactly discusses what we are discussing today, chaired by Singapore. And it was a consensus on the fact that we need to build these global tech with the different layers. It's not just about technology, it's about developing the know-how, making sure that different countries around the world are empowered with knowledge development, with the know-how development. And tech and morality should be joined together at the development stack. In the past, we did not have algorithms that are self-explanatory, that are transparent. But today, when I'm trying to maybe submit an algorithm to a conference, it would be part of the requirement to make sure that it is transparent. In a world that are trying to build an ethical paradigm for how we are building the technology. So there is a trickle-down effect from regulation to technology development. It's not enough. This is why I'm a big advocate of nudging the system towards a better economic value by being action-oriented, by being as well specific around those things.
But I think we are not disagreeing at all. I
think we're agreeing. That's how
we're
I
just
think.
speaking
Yes.
two different languages. You're talking like a tech person who just says, oh, we are developing this. Yeah, of course. All I'm saying is there is going to be no international regime. It's not going to be developed. But those who already have an advantage will continue to have an advantage until somebody breaks their advantage. And that's the reality. People are innovating. Now, obviously, there will be a lot less innovation in Afghanistan than there will be in the United States. There will be a lot less innovation in, Nauru than there will be in China. And so, therefore, the Pandora's box will be opened one hole at a time by whoever is able to dig that hole into the Pandora's box. And the rest of it will remain a conversation as it is in most cases in the world. So that's just, I'm just taking a very realistic view, because I sometimes hear a lot of words about, this is desirable, and global. No, not from you, I'm talking in general. And so therefore, what we have to understand is that there is not going to be global governance of tech easily. And there is not going to be a equal or fair distribution of technological prowess around the world either.
So Sam, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think a lot of it it comes back to which part of the technological stack we're talking about. So I think when it comes to the most cutting edge models, the national security realities are that the United States, China, these states are never going to share their most powerful systems with other countries. Even, the Microsoft UAE deal, a lot of work went into that. It was clearly, very successful in what it was trying to achieve, but there is still going to be a vast swathe of the most cutting edge frontier models that the United States will just simply not feel comfortable sharing outside a very small group of close Five Eyes, NATO allies and partners. There are other parts of the technological stack that I think the United States, other countries will feel much more eager to try and disseminate as broadly as possible, partly for ethical reasons, but also for self-interested economic and political reasons. I think they, at least in Washington, there's this perception that the United States needs to compete when it comes to technology with states like China by improving their offering to the global South. So they need to help build out AI infrastructure in various places to try and compete on the international stage. And so I think there's and then I think it's absolutely correct to bring this lens of realism and the political, just the fundamental realities of the current political moment. There is going to be hard limits on how much technology the great powers share with other states, for better or for worse. And so I think that does put a premium on other states to try and figure out how they're going to innovate themselves, because they can't rely on technological distribution from other states.
So
Please.
everything is designed. Nothing that we live in today's reality just happens systematically. So I think everything has been designed by former stack of politics, stack of regulations, and as well international conventions. So we live a reality that manifests the decisions of yesterday. And as we have heard, there are different nations, different jurisdictions, different markets. So yes, while we have countries that believe that they need to be the sole custodians of technology developments, we have others who are willing in emerging markets to share this technology box. And the efficiencies that exist around these markets, it is what we are going to capitalize on. And it's not just words. I have Blueverse, which is an investment fund that have over 250 million USDs, and we invest in emerging markets. We invest in Armenia, where we have one of the global unicorns in AI and creative industry that's called PixArt. Armenia is not the United States. It's not China. But they're leading in developing this kind of creative industry that's based on AI and based on artistic sciences. So we have other countries as well, like in Nepal at the moment. They are leading in building genomics structures that are also using AI training sets. And they are not the United States. And they are not as well China. So would we live in a reality that cancels every little progress that exists in other nation? We should be as well real in acknowledging the attempts that exist within those ecosystems and maybe amplifying the effect. In our fund, we have placed over $20 million in these ecosystems separately. They don't need us. They're already in Armenia, this company is already a unicorn. They're already reaping over 1 billion investments in that market. Now you would tell me, oh, what's one unicorn in Armenia in comparison to 369 unicorns in China and other parts of the world? But it says something. When you have a country that doesn't have the same tech stack, that doesn't have the same power stack to develop this technology, developing it in this market. So the call is not to live in despair and live in absolute, I would say, submission towards this kind of stereotypical old narrative, very old ancient narrative that we have specific power dynamics that we should live by. I agree. I see this power dynamic, but I don't subscribe to a tomorrow that just only believe in this power dynamic, because we have lived historical moments where different countries around the world build their own sovereignty across different technologies. And to me, technology development is about sovereignty today.
I think this is one of the virtues of this particular group of people, that we have such disparate viewpoints. But looking at and moving the conversation into control, but maybe not regulation for the moment, and into more natural fields of control, are we on the verge of seeing competition over resources as a pinch point for development? And I'm going to turn this one over.
I think that competition already exists, and I think we are already seeing it. And I think that the great powers, obviously, and the point is very valid, that every sovereign nation has to struggle to try and assert its sovereignty. And it's a long, just as there have been great powers, there have been efforts to try and resist them and their dominance, and therefore multiple actors emerging in a more multilateral, multipolar world emerging is actually good. And in tech, probably that is slowly emerging. But at the moment, I think that there is a competition. There's a competition for rare earth minerals. There's a competition for, even if you look at the conflict that we see over Taiwan, that is primarily very much about semiconductors, etc. And we see all of this going on. So yes, there will be competition. Question is, will a multipolar world diminish the adverse impact of that? Because we are already seeing that a multipolar world is emerging. That I will say one can only leave to the future. But the pattern is repeating itself. Both China and the United States, and even Russia to a lesser extent, are trying to engage in a competition for the resources that are needed. And even in terms of finding and funding people and innovators in other countries is a way of trying to maintain their dominance. And I agree that every little drop, everything slowly diminishes that dominance. But again, because I come from the political world, so therefore I have to talk about the strategic reality. The strategic reality remains that at this moment, that dominance endures. Is it desirable? Of course, I kept saying from the beginning that the desirability is very different from the reality. So today's reality is this. Tomorrow, hopefully, there will be a different reality, and day after tomorrow, an even better one. But at the moment, I think that there is competition between the great powers, and that competition is, in fact, intensifying, not diminishing.
And I think one of the most salient examples of where you're seeing that competition play out right now is in semiconductor, in the semiconductor industry, where the United States has really tried to kind of hold back China's progress on semiconductor construction, and China and other countries around the world are kind of pouring vast sums of money into their semiconductor industries to try and give themselves autonomy. And I think for now, at least the view from Washington is that the export controls have been fairly successful, that they've kind of opened up a 18-month to 2-year lead over China on semiconductor construction. They've kind of bought themselves some time in this kind of technological race that might be playing out. But you're definitely seeing increasingly fierce competition over semiconductor construction all over the world, with vast amounts of kind of domestic subsidies. And that obviously is closely related to raw materials, because you need all sorts of critical minerals, all sorts of materials to go into those semiconductor fabrication facilities.
And I suppose, Dr. Hoda, you've been a very strong advocate for exactly those moves to break those monopolies. Is there anything in additional you'd want to add on that particular point, or shall we swing it away?
And I think we really need to analyze how moral is it for us to globally slow down innovation for the sole economic advantage of one nation versus other in the world. And this is what has been happening for a very long time. This war tariffs between United States and Japan on semiconductor existed, and as well in between United States and Russia. And now we see it in between United States and China. I mean, we know about the CHIP Act by President Biden. I think the allocation was 52 billion USDs into this. to build that kind of what did we call it? I think it was a high fence, small yard kind of construction for semiconductors plants in the United States. But if I asked you, since the initiation of a CHIP Act until today, let's not look at the war tariffs, the tariff wars, and let's look at the pragmatic progress that has been done locally in the United States in nationalizing this industry and acquiring innovation excellence in the industry. How many chip fabrication houses has been established? We know of 2 that is not in full development yet. So I think pragmatically, yes, you slowed down innovation 18 to 18 months to 10 months. But in reality, you did not accelerate the progress on semiconductors to those level. On the contrary, we're facing as well delays in producing for the next chip sizes for like the 2 nanometers and the below 2 nanometers that are required in precision medicine. So the slowdown on this innovation is not particular to just the US. It's not advantageous just to the US on AI accelerators and others, but also it's putting the world in disadvantage and bringing discoveries that are partaking in biological kind of and health related precision medicine practices. We still see, countries like Singapore or South Korea trying to push that narrative from small fabrication houses perspective. And they're trying to bring synthesis biology and precision medicine into practices, regardless of this tariff war. I just don't think that we should be proud today of those practices, because they are not productive when it comes to building innovation for humanity or building that kind of critical progress on innovation.
I don't think anybody is being proud. I think he's just stating a fact that this is what's happening and that this is what US strategy is. And so when you discuss strategy, it's not about you support it. If I say that this glass has only half the glass is full of water, it doesn't mean I'm saying that it should only have half the glass of water. That's all I'm saying.
No. That's not. That's exactly what I'm not saying. My perspective on this, on being realistic, quantitative around the evidence, on what was the economic value. The perception on this economic value was to build a new innovation on a national level. Did we achieve that? No, we did not achieve that.
But the point I was making was that that's not what was said. So you are answering a point that was not raised.
No.
Nobody said that it's something for the US to be proud of. It's just that that's what the US has done. Now, if they keep doing something like that, yes, of course it will delay innovation, and that's not a good thing. We all agree on that. But we are talking about both 2 things, what is desirable and what is happening. So if somebody is describing what is happening...
Your Excellency, we cannot deny that there is a sense of celebration around what's happening in the war tariff today. The whole dialogue is about just focusing on AI emerging trends and US, China kind of competition. But the world is more than this. Countries like us exist. Emerging markets exist. Attempts on emerging markets exist. My misalignment on pride discussion here is not just in reference to what you have put on the table, Sam, but on the sense that we are abstracting technological innovation on emerging technology on what's happening on this kind of a trade war tariff.
Okay, I'm going to pull this into line in it right at this point, because I think we're almost talking across each other. And there is a difference between restraining and regulating. And certainly from a legal perspective, there's a huge difference between those 2 things. What's interesting about the questions which are arising is that there's a theme of insecurity and apprehension about AI development. I mean, there's questions here about censorship, social impact and conflict, the end of the nation state. And whether we like it or not, these technologies represent a future that we find it hard to grasp. And I think we should move the conversation into our ideas about regulation, not necessarily to stifle, but to ameliorate those insecurities, because we are looking at a future which we don't fully understand. You may, I certainly don't. And that is the unfortunate thing. I am the majority. So I'll ask the question to Sam. Is it realistic to expect AI and space being deemed a global common good when it looks like the only people that benefit are the great powers and there's no seeming regulatory structure emerging at this moment in time?
Well, it kind of comes back to a lot of these discussions that we've been having. I think it's essential that there is some sort of global governance of these technologies, especially as these systems get increasingly powerful. So if we really are going to enter a world in which we can design AI systems that are vastly more intelligent than humans, then that could be a complete game changer for international politics, for economics, for everything. And I think it would be a terrible outcome if any one country could decide to push that button and enter a world in which you have systems that are vastly more powerful and intelligent than humans. Like, that should not be a decision that any one country can make. So it's essential that we have some sort of global coordinated approach to making those sorts of decisions. At the same time, I think the reality is that there are going to be a couple of countries that are on the cutting edge developing those sorts of systems. And so that means that you're either reliant on their sort of restraint to hold back themselves from making those sorts of decisions in a situation in which they may find themselves in a kind of competitive race, or you're reliant on smaller groups of more powerful countries, unfortunately, getting together and kind of coordinating in more kind of collusive clubs in the same way that we saw with nuclear weapons. This was not a decision that was made by the entire world. This was this was a series of kind of bilateral, that's gradually expanded negotiations. And that is is that a moral way to make decisions? Probably not, but that is just kind of the reality of what happens when technological advances are kind of intersecting with international politics at the moment. But I certainly think that if we are going to develop systems that are more powerful than any technology we've had in the past, that cannot be decided upon just by small groups of decision makers in Washington and Beijing and pick your national capital. I think that would be a terrible outcome.
Okay, so the question I'm going to ask then for both of you, from your very different perspectives, what does good regulation look like? I'm going to ask the technology expert first. You sure? Okay. Ladies' prerogative.
Actually, I have no idea. I have no idea what good regulation. All I'm saying is that it's not going to happen easily. It's desirable from the point of view of global governance, equitable. I'm just stating what is the current reality. That reality, hopefully, the hopeful version is that it will change. Everybody will, the smaller actors will end up contributing to technology development in a way in which the larger actors then understand that we are not the only ones, and therefore we have to take all of this innovation into account. And that may be the beginning of having some kind of dialogue. But right now, as of today, I don't think that serious dialogue exists. And I think that perspective we both share, that doesn't exist, that the big players would rather keep others out. And that's what's happening at the moment. Only when they accept that everybody has a seat at the table will you be able to create some kind of a equitable and fair, or forget about equitable and fair, just a reasonable framework for a regulation. But at the moment, it is the Wild West, the title that we have chosen, the Wild West of emerging technologies. What happened in the Wild West? Eventually, the Wild West settled down. But in the beginning, everybody just showed up, took out the minerals that they could, took over the land that they could, etc. And that's the race that we are seeing in the world right now. And of course, there are players who want to be fair and moral, and they want to contribute to others, and they must be admired and appreciated. But then there are others who will try to block others and also delay innovation in the process, and with all its negativity. But that's how it is going to happen. It's not going to be by 4 or 5, 6 people sitting together and saying, this is a sensible thing, let's do it right now, because the global stakes are too big. That's why I quoted President Putin, that's how the thinking of world leaders is. And so this gap is going to take a while to bridge. And when that happens, we will have dialogue. So I don't know what a desirable regulatory framework looks like that is fair, which is acceptable, and which also keeps Personally, I think that innovation, and you will agree with me, innovation is actually delayed and pushed back by too much regulation. The reason why there has been so much innovation in tech is because it was an unregulated area. So that's why, how do you stop that or not stop that and yet regulate? It is going to take a whole new level of human thinking and the ability to cooperate and work with one another.
So we see quite change of practices in the way we build regulations. So I think one of the most important component is being holistic again when we are developing regulation. So we should be granular on defining what is being holistic. It means technology is impacting people in wider sectors. So when you develop this kind of solution and regulation, you should not just put in the law practitioners on the map, but you should bring in civic society, you should bring in social scientists, you should bring in psychologists, economists on the table to put in the law and regulation with the law practitioners, because there is a quite of missing knowledge capital in the room. I think from previous scenarios, we've seen one of the quite pioneering efforts to break down through this regulation structures is what the EU tried to do within their GDPR law. It was a great attempt, but it was a solo kind of attempt, in my opinion, because you have this regulation that says you have the right to be forgotten. You have the right to be not to be analyzed. But in reality, I could have the regulation, but it has absolutely zero effect because technology is not being built for it, because I don't have the technological component that supports that. Like you're using multiple platforms today. Can you tell the platforms, and they are signed for GDPR laws, can you tell Instagram or WhatsApp or other platforms that I'm sorry, I have the right not to be analyzed. I have the right to be forgotten. So you have to not analyze me within this. And you have to provide transparency for me in order for me to hold you accountable on my rights. That doesn't exist because we did not couple technology and development with regulation development. They will need to be one stack kind of mission. The other aspect is bringing the moral human perspective of technology towards regulation, because I think right now, even with the EU AI law and AI Act, it's risk-based analysis, which is quite alarming because it's risk-based, but it's not principle-based and value-driven for the citizens. Yes, there are few values around the human rights, but they're not quite quantitative in terms of how are we going to implement them, which is understandable. When you deal with law, you deal with the indigenous also practices that exist in different jurisdictions. You deal with the efforts of harmonizations across different jurisdictions, and you have to leave a space for the the legislators and the law enforcement bodies to also apply indigenous practices on the regulation practices that you are building. So that tension in between how much regulation we should bring in with how much freedom does exist, and we should play to the advantage of that tension, because I agree it could be going to the wrong direction, but there is a way of bringing everybody on the table and bringing an advantageous way of doing it. UAE is a country where Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid said from the get-go that we are protesting pro-validation environment. We want to test for those new technologies. We want to ease regulation. And I think having these kind of, I would call them in terms of regulation, demilitarized zone, where you can maybe test for new innovative ideas, but in a much more relaxed regulation structures or innovative regulation structures. Because I mean, in certain jurisdictions, to bring in regulation to practice, it takes you over 3 years. You have to go through three different layers of parliament or Congress, and then by the time you are bringing it to market, the technology is leaping maybe 50 years into the future. So you have to reapply this circle again. So the efficacy of practices in different jurisdictions maybe will hinder that. So I think also going into attraction zone where we can have that kind of regulatory sandboxes, and today we have many regulatory sandboxes globally. UAE is one of them, on many of emerging technology concepts, tokenization, digital assets, and AI. are one of the few of those. Is going to help us understand what regulation we should bring, how fast we should bring them into market. So my optimality box onto solving for this is making sure that we are open, we're inclusive, we're listening, and we're as well very self-aware of what works for us and what doesn't work for us on different contexts.
Okay, thank you. So just to check, we're coming into our last 15 minutes. And I'm going to pull on questions that we've received from the floor, and I'll leave these open to whoever would like to chime in at this point. So the first one is a question about censorship and trust between people and government. How do we know what we know now at this point in relation to technology? We understand words like false news, we understand words like fact, but where does that sit within government regulation now?
I mean, it's hard to say because, regulation is different per jurisdiction for fake news and all these kind of aspects. I know that in terms of what's happening in UAE, we kind of have a firm stance because we shut it down at specific regulation perspective. There are fines for this. But from a global perspective, I think the platforms in general, that platforms that we are using, the social media platforms and other type of platforms are designed to allow for misinformation and to allow for polarization of opinions, because it's a global soft power. And we have seen the reconstruction of the big companies around the world around that kind of a freedom of speech. What happened with X, with Twitter, is a clear example and clear evidence of this. And until today, I don't think we will have affirmative answer that can tell if the decision that has been made by the investors in the past 2 years is to protect freedom of speech or to actually undermine future freedom of speech, because you still see on the platform this kind of yo-yoing tendency in between protectivism over like freedom of speech, and then you go back and negate this kind of conditions when you see suitable on the platforms in general. When it comes to misinformation, disinformation, and fake news, the technology that we have in hand, because it's unreliable and we are allowing algorithms to hallucinate, allowing a reality where algorithm can hallucinate to exist, we're promoting for unreliable and secure dissemination of information. And I think we'll see more and more of that. It's easy technological solutions. We can have fact checks being embodied on our platforms, but they're not. We can have these kind of dynamic checks on false news. Reuters are doing some, other journalism views are doing some. We're evolving, I think, as we are doing it, the practices of journalism that existed in the past, which is quite positive. But seeing that intertwined with every technology click that we will have is very important. Being able, before sending a message, to know that, sorry, this message might be understood as a false narrative, and you have to be careful about it, is very important.
Husain, do you want to come in?
Well, I mean, there is one model which is to try and block everything and control everything, which some countries are trying. There's the UAE model, which is a much more balanced approach to try and just filter out things. But I agree that there is that in some cases the profit motive of the huge platforms basically encourages polarization as a means of increasing and improving their ability to make a profit. And so one of the things for a future regulatory discussion, because I don't think there is one happening now, would be, should these individuals or these corporations or these investors have that kind of power of being able to unleash total untruths? You know, just like we even in the conventional media, we had that problem. The reason why there was a problem for many Arab countries with Al Jazeera was its use of its power to foment trouble in many countries, and the same applies to these platforms. And even regular and conventional media was never fully regulated in an equitable and fair manner. We all have complaints about global media, global mainstream and conventional media. So I think we will continue to have those, and the only solution might actually rest with technology. Only the techies might be able to come up with a technological solution of how to actually beat one algorithm with another. And that is something that we will have to wait and see.
Well, on that note, the gentleman with the watch has told me that we've run out of time. I would like us all to please show our appreciation for our very fine speakers this morning, and thank you all also for your attendance. Thank you.